Welcome to Profi Plays. I'm Profi, and I want to have for you today a little video about thinking about using Fate for solo RPGs. Interestingly, this is actually the reason that I started this channel. I had put together a playlist, which you can find under this channel, about using the Gemulator, which I put on kind of my professional channel, which I use mostly for like my teaching, my day job kind of stuff. But I occasionally would put kind of fun videos up there. So this was a set of videos about using a particular GM emulator that had come out. It's just kind of a how-to series. Um, anyway, that got some attention, partially from the creator of that. And one of the commenters said, "Hey, well, do you have any thoughts about using Fate for solo role-playing games?" So that's what I'm doing here, talking about my thoughts regarding Fate. Now, Fate, if you're not aware, there are a few different versions of it. So I have here in my hand, this is the Fate 4 book. Um, one thing that I like about it is that it's fairly inexpensive. I think I got this for like $25 or something like that, which for a gaming book is a pretty good price. Anyway, right, so this is one version of it. You can also find there are a couple other versions of the system. All of them are kind of interrelated, and it's very much designed as a system that you can tweak, right? So this is what I have played. I really like there's a Fate Condensed, which is a much shorter book. I want to say you can get that for $5 or so. There's also Fate Accelerated, and each of them has slightly different um, ways that things work in terms of the system, but they're all very closely related in terms of the core, right? So let's go ahead and talk some about Fate. I will say I do like this book quite a bit. I especially like the way that it suggests thinking about things um, like what is it that makes a scene, right? For example, like what are scenes about? What is a scene for? That kind of thing, right? So I think it's very useful for just kind of general advice about running role-playing games, even if you don't necessarily adopt the system. But let's get into the system, and specifically, we'll look then at how it applies for solo role-playing games. So the core elements of the Fate system, I think we can really break down into these three things. So one is ladders and pyramids. That's really kind of how the mechanical part of the system works. Then aspects, and then finally fate points. So it's really, I think these are the main elements of the system. So let's look at each of them in some detail. Right, so first, ladders and pyramids. So the ladder is a set of adjectives or numbers, uh, kind of have both descriptions here, that describe the quality of a task, skill, or action. Right, so and this ranges from a +8, which is legendary, to -2, which is terrible. So just as a simple example, suppose that I am great at a particular task. I'm great at driving. Let's say, perhaps I'm a race car driver or something like that. Well, in that case, that great is attached to the number +4. Then, anytime I do a task related to driving, what I will do is I'll take 4 fate dice. Right? These are also originally called fudge dice. Fate is really just kind of a tweaking of the old fudge system. So these dice it's a standard D6, except that it's really, I guess, a misshapen D3, in that you have 2 sides are plus, 2 sides are minus, 2 sides are blank. So you roll 4 of these, like so, right? And then whatever combination comes up, each plus moves up 1, each minus moves down 1. So what I just rolled here was 2 minuses, a plus, and a blank. That means I would take that +4 for my driving, I'd move it down 2 and then up 1, so I'm actually operating on a +3. So I may be a great driver on the whole. Right now, for whatever reason, randomness involved, I'm only a good driver in the situation. So the question is, how good of a driver do I have to be for the particular task that I'm trying to fulfill? Right, so you can use these descriptors then to say, well, for this particular thing, you really need to be epic. That's +7 to accomplish this task. Right, so being a good driver, you're not going to do it. Right? Or it might be that, oh, you just have to be an average driver, in which case being a good driver was good enough. Right? So it gives you kind of this descriptiveness. Right? Now, it doesn't, uh even though technically you have to use this in some way to think about the difficulty rating of tasks, right? So, oh, this is a good task, a good difficulty task. Right? What that really means is you have to be good at whatever the skill is. Right? At the end, after you've rolled your dice. Now, so that's the latter part of it. Now, the pyramid part of it is the structure of skills. Now, this is the way that things are designed in Fate 4, also in Fate Condensed. Both of them have what they call the skill pyramid, where there are a bunch of skills available. I think that the core book lists something in the neighborhood of, I want to say it's 20, 25 different skills that you would have. It's a skill-based system, but you wouldn't necessarily have all of these skills. Most of them you'd have at a rating of 0. So you have one skill that's at a +4, two at a +3, three at a +2, and then four at a +1. So when you list these out, if you actually look at the way that the original character sheet was designed, you can actually see here, right, they actually have set up for it to be set up as a pyramid. So here you'd list out, here are my four skills that are at a +1, here are my three that are at +2, here's my two that are +3, there's my one that's at a +4. And then whenever you progress, you have to make sure that your pyramid stays balanced in that you always have to have a base underneath that level that can support whatever's above it, right? So, for example, when I advance, I could not just take one of my +1s and turn it into +2, because I'd have four +2s and three +1s. Then that pyramid would topple. Right? So it restricts the way that you can progress. Right. So, and this is really just a way of making sure you don't have hyper specialized characters that are, legendary at one thing, but then really bad at everything else. Right. So that's another part of the system. Okay. So mechanically, you have those two elements. You have the ladder and the pyramid, right, that really describe the way that the mechanics of the system tend to work at the basic level. Now, there is a little difference if you do Fate Accelerated in that it has a simplified skill system. It's really more like if you play Dungeons and Dragons, something like that. You have your six core characteristics. That's very much the way that the Fate Accelerated system is. You have kind of these six, I forget what they call them. They're basically domains, but they're very, very similar to the Dex, Strength, Constitution, these kinds of things. All right. But nonetheless, it's the same core mechanic, and you're going to have a rating on it, and then you roll, right, four of your fate dice, and then pluses and minuses will adjust. Now, another element of the system is aspects. Aspects are really a key to understanding how a Fate game is supposed to feel. And that is what an aspect is, it's an element of the situation, the game world, the character that can be used in some way, right, to affect outcomes. Right. So when you first set up your game, right, you have to decide what kind of genre are we playing, what kind of world are we playing in, what kinds of characters and factions are in this world, and as part of this process, you're going to choose certain game aspects that you'll assign. These game aspects are things that then, as players, under certain conditions, you can invoke these aspects, which basically just give you a bonus, right? Or let you re-roll. Then character aspects. So your character is defined partially by their skills, then also by their aspects. And these aspects are generally character traits of some kind. It might be what kind of job do you have, effectively the equivalent of a class, that kind of thing. Right? And then there are situation aspects. So things like, oh, the building is on fire. This is something that will have an impact. Now, there are also other types of aspects. So those are the three main types of aspects. All of those, at least game aspects and character aspects, are permanent. Right? That is, they do not change typically. Situation aspects are something that are built into whatever situation you're in, and you may possibly create new ones or change these as you take action. A boost is a very temporary aspect that just lasts for one roll. So this is where you have done something to set yourself up for something turning out really well. Right, so you spend some time memorizing the map of the city, and that improves your drive roll as you're trying to make you're trying to plan an escape route or something like that. You're trying to drive this escape route. You get a +2 just on that roll, right? So this would be an aspect, but it's an aspect that's very, very transitory. Then consequences. This would be effectively the equivalent of injury, right? So you get hurt in some way. Consequence then would be an aspect that gets attached to your character that then provides penalties to rolls. So these various aspects, most of them you can invoke to get a bonus, right, or the ability to re-roll your dice. The last main element of the system would be fate points. Right? So fate points, the way you earn these fate points, like one, they're refreshed every session. So every session you walk in, the normal standard base rate is you get 3. Right, so you have 3 fate points that you then get to spend over the course of that session. You can also earn fate points by accepting compels, right? So if you are playing fate in a social aspect, then this is where the game master will sometimes say, hey, your character has this particular aspect. Knowing that about them, that would have this negative consequence in this particular situation, right? So if you want to go ahead and play that out, I'll give you a fate point to do it. On the other hand, if you don't want to do that, if you want to act inconsistently with your character's aspect, you have to pay a fate point to avoid uh, this compel. Right, so you end up with this choice that as a player you have to make. Right? Are you going to follow through on the negative side of your aspects, right? Or so then you get a fate point, or are you going to pay a fate point to avoid acting on that? And then the last way that you can get a fate point is by conceding a conflict. So you get into a fight with somebody, you say, you know what, I'm out, I surrender, that kind of thing. You get a fate point for doing that. Then when you get the fate points, you turn around and you can spend them. I already mentioned invoking aspects, getting that +2 or reroll. Also, there are things called stunts, which depending on the details of the world, right? So these would be things like superpowers. So if, say, you're playing a superhero game, stunts would be what are the powers that you have. Some of these stunts they recommend having powered by fate points, so you then would have a limited ability to use them. You spend them to refuse compels, as I just mentioned. You can also spend them to declare aspect-based story details, right? So this would be something like, oh, I have a background as a member of a particular secret society, but I'm just going to declare that this society, right, shared information with me about this particular mystery or something like that, right? So you can spend fate points in that way to declare realities about the game world in which you are existing. So now that we have some sense of kind of what Fate is, what the core elements of it are, I'm going to talk a little bit about Fate and solo role playing. Now, there are some people out there that really love using Fate for solo role playing. And like I could see elements of it. It is, as far as systems go, it's a fairly simple one. It's not one where you have to know lots of tactics. There are basically, I didn't really get into the different moves you can make, but there are basically 4 different types of actions you can take, right? And that makes it very, very simple. Here, I'll pull it out right now. There's a really nice, if you want to take a look at this book, you can get the PDF on a pay what you want basis through DriveThru RPG. I will be sure to include a link in the description for that. So there are 4 types of actions. That's it. Right, so you can overcome, that is to get past some kind of passive obstacle. You can create an advantage. Creating an advantage allows you then if you do that successfully, right, then that allows you to get a free invoke on an aspect, so you don't have to spend fate points to invoke that aspect. You can attack and defend. That's it. It's really just those 4 things, which that makes it very easy. It's not like many other games that might be much more complicated, right? So that makes it a fairly easy thing for people to do in terms of working through the mechanics of the system. Um, Now you can already see on the screen. I, on the other hand, I don't love it. And there are reasons that I don't love it. One is that, as I guess I'll just read what I have on the screen and I'll expand on it. One is that I feel like Fate, the way it is designed, it is a generic system, which means then there is no world, but you have to do all the world building yourself. And if you love doing world building from absolute scratch, like really, there is nothing in this game system that tells you whether it is a fantasy game or a sci-fi game or a superhero game or a chthonic horror game. It could be any of these things, which for me, this is too little guidance, and that creates a huge mental load for me as a soloist trying to come up with what the world is like in every detail. Like, because every detail falls on me. And not just the details, but even the broad strokes, right, fall on me. Right. So I like having a little bit more guidance. Now, you're not stuck with just this book. Right, like one of the reasons that Evil Hat Productions just gives the PDF away for free, if you don't want to pay them anything, pay what you want means you can't actually put in zero as the amount that you want to pay. They're perfectly happy to hand out this PDF because a lot of what they sell is the settings. Right, so you have then various setting books that you could potentially buy that then would provide that guidance, would tell you what the setting is like, what types of aspects are available within that particular setting, what kinds of skills would be more likely to show up in that setting that may not be the simple skill list that we have in this book. It might be a different set of skills, right? Or what types of stunts do you have, right? So some of this may just be that the literally the only book, the only Fate book that I have is this one, which doesn't provide that guidance. Right, so some of it might be that. Um, Also, I find that for me, I think Fate is one of those games where it requires a certain mindset, and you kind of have to get into this mindset, adopt it, and adapt to it for it to really be effective. And I have not done that. Right. So for me, when I think about this game, so like I can make a character. Now, some of the character creation gets kind of funky when you're doing it solo because the way it is designed is they really want you to in the character creation process to interconnect all the different player characters, and there's a process by which they do that, which I think is very cool. Actually, I think it's a nice idea. So I would definitely recommend reading this book, even if you don't plan to play Fate, because it has lots of neat ideas in it. Right? But so, so one character creation you can't really pass to other players because there aren't other players there, right? It's just you, right? And you have to come up with all of these aspects with very little guidance. And then not only that, once you have your character, once you have the general game world, then every single time you get into a scene, you need to come up with another set of aspects. And anytime you try to create an advantage for you, you have to come up with another aspect. And I found that whenever I was trying to play Fate as a soloist, I basically just said, forget aspects, forget fate points. I'm just rolling the skills. That's it. Because I just found it to be too much of a burden to decide what elements of the situation were technically aspects that had a mechanical component to them and what were just kind of realities that wouldn't have any kind of mechanical component to them. Like that kind of division is something you have to make decisions about all the time. And I found this to be too many decisions for me uh, when I was trying to solo this. I've only, but then again, I've only run Fate a very limited number of times, and that I want to say that I just kind of did it as maybe an extended one shot, like one afternoon. I thought after I got this book and had read through it, I thought, okay, it's kind of cool. I know people like to do it. I found somebody that had a solo engine that they designed for Fate. I wanted to try it out, right? So I played through some scenes there and kind of got a storyline going. And yeah, I ended up just kind of totally ignoring the fate points and aspects and really just focusing on rolling the skills was more or less all that I did in terms of using the system. I also did run some Fate for my kids before we played Dungeons and Dragons. I was trying to get them kind of into role playing, but using simpler systems than Dungeons and Dragons, right? So I tried some ICRPG with them, and Fate was one of the things that I tried because it was very clear whenever I tried using other games with them that they wanted something that they could have a big impact on what the world was like, right? So trying to tie them down into a specific genre, a specific setting, wasn't really working very well. And I thought, well, this is good. Like, so this is a nice generic setting. If they want to make this like one of the video games that they play on Roblox or whatever and incorporate these characters, sure, we can do that. That's something that a generic system has the benefit of doing, right? So we did that. But even there, I found it difficult to run. It just, because again, right, thinking of aspects all the time is something just it might just be an inexperienced thing, but it did not work for me. Right? Right, so that's it. I'm sure it may be one of those things where with more practice, right, it is something that you can do. And I can definitely see where for somebody that is more narratively oriented, this is something that could be really, really nice. Right? in that it allows you, like, in using these aspects, it kind of takes narrative components and gives them mechanical features, right? So I think that this is something that could work for some people, but just does not work for me that well, right? So those are my thoughts on Fate as a system and on specifically using Fate for solo role-playing games. I, I hope this is somewhat helpful. At least you know kind of how the system works a little bit, right? And then and at the very least, you can get the PDF of the book, look through it, and give it a try. I think that's what part of the fun of solo role playing is that you can experiment, right, with different systems, experiment with different combinations of systems, and see what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what elements of a particular game do you like, what elements do you not like. I mean, like I said, even if you're not planning to play Fate, I recommend reading the book because it has some really, at least to me, interesting ideas about how we think about what we're doing with role playing games. So I think that that in itself makes it worthwhile at least, right, to download the PDF and peruse it, right? And you can see, I mean, I had done that, and then I saw the book in the game store. It was $25. Like, I have $25. I can pay for that, right? So I thought it was worthwhile to acquire the thing, even though in the end, I've really not played very much Fate at all. Nor do I really plan to play more of it. Nonetheless, I'm not going to get rid of this book. So, I guess take that for what it's worth. So, in any case, I feel like I'm repeating myself more than I really ought to at this point, so I think it's probably a good idea to call an end to this. So, those are my thoughts on Fate and solo role playing games. This is Profi signing off.